What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, January 11th, 2017, and we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with whatever your concerns, comments, and questions happen to be. Now, we're going to start off today. At this point, the corporate media may be on a suicide watch because they have managed to step into it in a grand fashion. And it has to do with this story involving a sexual perversion, if you will, supposedly carried out by Donald Trump in Moscow. And it's already got its own hashtag, Pgate. And the story was basically that while he was in Moscow, Trump hired a couple of prostitutes to relieve themselves on the same bed where the Obamas had slept when they were visiting there. And this story basically was posted at a website called 4chan by an anonymous poster, was then picked up. Okay, I got a direct message from the Trump people here on my phone. Anyway, so they picked up this story. It went to Rick Wilson, who's a GOP consultant, part of the Never Trump group. Rick Wilson has extremely close ties to Evan McMullin, who's an ex-intelligence official, also a neocon, also opposed to Trump. McMullin gave this report to John McCain, who openly admits he was the one who handed it over to intelligence agencies, and they were running with this story. Okay, and basically it turns out 4chan is saying this is nonsense. Now, a lot of the corporate media actually did have this story a while ago and said this is just not passing the smell test. But BuzzFeed ran with it. And even though BuzzFeed said this is unsubstantiated, it's just too juicy and hot to not do something with. And then once BuzzFeed had it, that was the goad for the rest of the corporate media to run with this story. And as it turns out, it is a complete hoax. 4chan is saying it was fan fiction. Somebody who hates Donald Trump just made this up as a fictional story and posted it, and it was grabbed by everybody up the chain, including the corporate media, and they are hugely, hugely embarrassed on this. Donald Trump, of course, said this is complete and absolute nonsense. The Kremlin is saying we don't know where this came from. It's got nothing to do with us. This information does not correspond to reality and is no more than fiction. So it's a huge embarrassment. And people are already making fun of it. People are already making fun of this. There was a video put out by this gentleman saying, I did give Donald Trump a golden shower. He liked it very much. And the gentleman on the tape is actually in the business of selling custom-made bathrooms, high-end metal fixtures. So his idea of a golden shower is probably more along the line of what you're using every day in your bathroom. And they're making fun of this whole thing. Now, Trump had his first press conference since winning the election today and got into a little bit of a tiff with CNN reporter Jim Acosta. And Acosta felt he had to stand up in defense of himself and his industry because Donald Trump, as an example of how the corporate media is just running wild, there was a report that a Michael Cohen had met with a representative of the Kremlin. And there's a Michael Cohen working for the Trump campaign. And the media had just say a representative of Donald Trump was meeting with a representative of Putin. See, he's a Russian stooge. And as Trump pointed out, these are two different Michael Cohens. And if you look at the passport of the Michael Cohen who works for the Trump campaign, it's obvious he did not leave the country. He was not over there in Europe at the time this was all supposed to go down. So he's out there saying this is an example of how the corporate media has just become reckless and sloppy in their attempts to describe me. So Jim Acosta stands up and says, I have a question, and Trump is ignoring him and going to the other reporters, and Jim keeps screaming, give me a question, can you categorically deny that you're in the employ, blah, 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 and Trump is basically saying, I'm not giving you a question, and he says, you are the fake news. and just absolutely blasts him, and Acosta just keeps trying to escalate it and disrupt the press conference to the point where Trump's press secretary, Sean Spicer, threatened to throw him out for all this chaos he was causing, behaving like a small child. But the fact of the matter is that CNN got caught reporting fake news about this meeting. CNN has been burned again over this P-Gate story. And they're thrashing around. They don't know what to do anymore. Their lies have caught up with them. Now, a senior Russian legislator has already come on out and said, no, I never met with anybody from the Trump campaign. Was interviewed by TASS and said, this is nonsense. This is an attempt clearly to sour relations between the U.S. and Russia to the point where Trump and Putin cannot repair them. But it's not working. It is not working. We're going to do a quick shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And I'm sorry if I sound excited and flustered, but I mean, the corporate media and the propaganda machine have just had a big one blow up in their face, and they're running around and screaming, and this could very well be the watershed moment in that war between the corporate media and the independent media. Because the corporate media was so desperate for anything they could tarnish Donald Trump with, they misstepped badly. Misstepped badly. And again, they went with a story with absolutely no evidence or corroboration or confirmation from anybody. Trump is calling BuzzFeed a failing pile of garbage in his press conference. And yeah, he's right. Trump went on saying, it's all fake news. It's phony stuff. It didn't happen. Trump's press secretary, Sean Spicer, is saying BuzzFeed is outrageous and highly irresponsible, and that's true. And this gets back to something I was saying back during that whole Pizzagate thing. And again, to clarify, I know pedophilia is a major problem among the rich and powerful, but Pizzagate felt like a setup. And we in the independent media, because we have become a major force shaping the public awareness of what's going on, we have to be journalists. We have to be responsible. We have to be very careful. We have to be more professional than the professionals over at the corporate media. When we get a story, we have to vet it. We have to double-check it. We have to fact-check it. And we don't go with anything that is questionable just because it sizzles and it'll get us more hits and more readers and everything. We have to be very careful. The corporate media is waiting for somebody in the independent media to stumble badly and sue them out of existence in an attempt to silence everybody else. And I think that was a big part of what was going on with Pizzagate. They wanted somebody to make an allegation that would open them up to defamation lawsuits. And most people didn't bite. Now, Russia Today has come on out going after that U.S. intelligence, and I use the word loosely, report on Russian hacking, pointing out that most of that material that's in that report, which is just claims without foundation, actually dates back from 2012, before Trump even declared he was going to be running for the presidency. They're using outdated material. Remember Tony Blair's dodgy dossier? Was based on a 12-year-old, outdated, stolen student thesis. And the thesis had been written before Iraq and the United Nations had come to an agreement about the weapons, and it was hopelessly outdated and inaccurate. But it serves the agenda, therefore we're going to move forward with this thing. Now, there's yet another intelligence report that's circulating around. Basically what it is they're going with the spaghetti approach. They're throwing as many of these allegations against the wall as they can in the hope that some of them are going to stick. And so there's another report going on about how Donald Trump, for the last 5 years, has been cultivated, supported, and assisted by Russia. CNN actually led with this, saying that this former member of British intelligence, who now works for a private intelligence company, basically that Russia has been building up Donald Trump so that Russia can control the United States by controlling Donald Trump. And, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu's immediately kicking up the fuss, saying, no, controlling the United States is my job. What is wrong with you people? And they're really in a panic mode, and it's really beginning to feel like those last few weeks before the collapse of the Soviet Union, where the Soviet citizens were aware the government and their corporate media were lying to them, and all the government and the corporate media could think of was more lies, and that just accelerated the breakup here. Now, at this point, I think it would be advisable for Donald Trump, once he takes office, to remember there are existing anti-monopoly laws which can be used to break up these giant media corporations that are in control of everything that you see, hear, and read. Now remember, originally in this country there were laws that placed strict limits on how much media any one entity could own. But back during Operation Desert Stomp, the U.S. government went to the largest media corporations and they said, we're going to make you a deal. You will embed your prostitutes and correspondents with our troops. You will report on the war the way we tell you to report on it, and in exchange, we will rescind all those limitations on media ownership, and you'll be able to buy up all your small competitors. And that's exactly what happened. The large corporate media propagandized you about the war in Iraq, Saddam's nuclear weapons, and so forth. And following that, they were able to gobble up all the small independent media into these giant corporations that now own it all. I remember when Clear Channel just went on this binge of buying AM radio stations all across the country, which is why we are in this situation right now where all corporate media is controlled by just a handful of people, all of whom have corporate interests and ties to the government. And there are laws already on the books that could break them up, and they need to be broken up. We need to bring back diversity of perspective and opinion to the American people. Now, supposedly intelligence chiefs briefed Donald Trump to tell him that Russia has compromising information on him. They're trying to sour relations between Trump and Putin before Trump can even get into office. Trying to make Trump automatically distrustful of everything Putin says. It's not working. And again, the media has stepped in it on this one. So follow along. I must have angered somebody. My server's under attack. The Washington Compost article claiming that Russia has compromising information on Trump came from an article in Mother Jones, which ran last October, that alleged a server owned by the Trump Organization and a server over at Russia's Alpha Bank were intermittently connecting, suggesting communications of some sort were going on. Now, back in November, the Washington Compost itself reported there was nothing to this, that the servers were engaged in routine business-related traffic. But today, all of a sudden, when needing to damage Trump, the Washington Compost decides that, oh, I guess Mother Jones was correct after all. There's something nefarious going on. And we're already hearing people talking about using the 25th Amendment to kick out Donald Trump as soon as he takes office because he's obviously a Russian stooge. He's not the Manchurian candidate. He's the Moscow candidate. And they're all making it up out of thin air. Now, the world is laughing at the U.S. intelligence agencies and the U.S. current political establishment. The Czech president basically came on out and said, all of this stuff is completely nonsense. Hillary Clinton lost the election because Americans aren't stupid. They chose between the candidates with their own minds. They didn't need any foreign influence. So, now the truth is, according to ex-CIA officer Kirikow, Clinton stole the nomination from Sanders. Everybody saw that happen. They're not going to go along with somebody who's that dishonest. And she was a bad candidate. And she had all that baggage following along behind her. Hillary Clinton is carrying more baggage around than Kim Kardashian on a photo shoot. And that's why she lost. Hillary and her supporters were living in a dream world that they could use corporate media and advertising and public relations to basically create an illusion of somebody you would want to vote for. And it didn't work because Americans are now skeptical, they're perceptive, they're analytical. They look past that front illusion to see what's really going on. And that's what they voted on. They didn't vote. The presidency isn't a best-dressed contest. It's not Mr. or Ms. Congeniality. It's a question of character, how people behave when they don't think anybody is looking. Now, we are seeing more and more dire warnings coming from Hillary supporters about violence on Inauguration Day, and they're out there talking in grandiose terms of riots on the scale of Mexico, coast to coast. We're going to just burn the country down because we didn't get the leader that we thought we wanted. And that, of course, is not how America is supposed to be run. Now, at this point, I'm going to say, given the over-expectations that were attached to the post-election riots, the threatening of the electors, the attempt to disrupt Congress' formal acceptance of the Electoral College result, I think we're going to get to Inauguration Day. For one thing, Washington, D.C. is probably going to be under a blizzard. And that may sort of cool things down, metaphorically speaking. There may be some violence. I don't think it's going to be the gigantic crowds, the crybabies and buttercups and snowflakes are thinking it's going to be. But obviously, the D.C. police and security details around President-elect Trump are going to be on their guard, and they should be. Paul Craig Roberts is still out there saying that Trump's inauguration still is not a slam dunk. Paul Craig Roberts is somebody I have a great deal of respect for. Now then, Barack Obama has given his farewell address. He broke with tradition. Normally, presidents give the farewell address from the Oval Office, and instead, Obama went back to Chicago to give his farewell address, during which he referred to himself 75 times. Remember what I said about narcissistic personality disorder? I think it's fully on display here. We ought to have psychological screening for all candidates for elected office. We really should. Would have flagged Anthony Weiner before he proved to be such a humiliation to his constituents. Now, Obama has always tried to claim, and wants this to be part of his official legacy, that he was the most transparent administration ever, yet it's already been leaked on out that Obama's staff at the White House are destroying public records. They're shredding documents before leaving office. And yes, previous presidents have done it, but it is still illegal. Everything in that White House is the property of the taxpayers. The work product of the president and the staff belongs to the American people. And we have a right to see what's in there, to be able to look back at that documentation at the Obama Presidential Library and say, maybe they weren't being as upfront with us about certain things, like Benghazi. But at the rate they're shredding documents at the White House, there's going to be nothing left for the Obama Presidential Library except autographed copies of his official legacy and those 2 little Obama Romney dolls I donated. Probably all that's going to be there. Now, the U.S. State Department is responding to demands, or has responded to demands, that there be some kind of proof behind all these allegations of Russia hacking the DNC and Russia hacking the election and Russia doing this and Russia doing that. And, of course, there isn't any evidence. Nobody's going to admit that, though. The State Department's official response to all of these inquiries is it would be irresponsible to release this evidence. It would compromise certain key individuals themselves. They're still living in a world where people trust the government just because it's the government, and that's not the new reality. The new reality is we all distrust the U.S. government because it is the U.S. government, and we rightly should do that. We got to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Hello, hi America. Welcome back to the show here. And speaking of politics and corruption, I actually get a lot of emails saying, why do you have politics and corruption as the same topic heading? Well, it's impossible to pry them apart. And apparently the House GOP last week changed a rule to allow members of Congress to keep their records hidden from ethics or criminal investigations. In other words, the law doesn't apply to the elites. If you conceal evidence, you can be charged with any number of crimes, including obstruction of justice, lying to the police, lying to the FBI. But Congress has just said, it's okay when we do it. Because we're members of Congress, and we are superior, and therefore we're entitled to the protections of the nobility, as it were. Speaking of corruption, apparently John McCain, in this last defense bill, slipped in a rider authorizing the sale of Native American land to a copper mining company. So more of this underhanded steal what belongs to the American people and sell it off for a quick profit here. Now, the House Oversight Chair, Jason Chaffetz, is saying the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server and whether or not she was responsible for classified information finding its way to foreign governments is not going away. And that in point of fact, with the incoming Trump administration, they are now feeling they are unfettered because they had been under pressure from the Department of Justice, Loretta Lynch, James Comey, and the FBI. We don't want to talk about this here. It's going to be a huge can of worms when they pry it open. There may be much more in there than they realize if my suspicions about what was going on are correct here. Now, turning over to the war zones, the Syrian army continues to discover chemical weapons belonging to the U.S.-backed terrorists in Aleppo. Remember back when Kerry and Obama were out there saying, oh, Assad, he's still got chemical weapons. He didn't give up his chemical weapons. He's still got chemical weapons, and he's using them on his own people. He's a terrible person. We have to invade. And the part that was missing was a reason for Assad to do something like that. Knowing that the United States government was aching for an excuse for a direct military intervention, what motive would he have had to do something like that? Clearly, the U.S.-backed terrorists had a motive to use chemical weapons and then frame Assad for it. Classic false flag operation. But apparently these U.S.-backed terrorists have been using these chemical weapons against civilians, against Syrian forces. So apparently it's bad when Assad does it or Saddam does it, but it's okay for the United States because we're exceptional. We're allowed to commit war crimes with impunity. Now, tensions are heating up over at China and Taiwan. The Chinese sent one of their aircraft carriers through the Taiwan Strait, close to Taiwan, resulting in Taiwan scrambling jets and some of their naval assets to sort of stand off and say, we know you're there. So a lot of saber rattling going on over there as well. So Obama is out there, he's doing his farewell tour, and he's running around and just basically blatting out accusations against Russia. You know, Russia has a Death Star. Russia's stealing socks out of your dryer when you're not looking. They're still out there pushing how the Russians hacked the DNC. And, of course, no acknowledgement that the DNC was acting inappropriately, illegally, and rigging the elections themselves. That's really what put American democracy at risk, was the behavior of the two traditional parties. All the cheating going on inside this country. That's the real risk to democracy, not Russia. Meanwhile, John McCain and Ben Cardin and Robert Menendez are getting ready to introduce yet another bill to impose more sanctions on Moscow. And it seems rather silly for them to be doing that because starting in a little more than a week, Trump is going to roll all that stuff back. We'll take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to step on back to this hugely embarrassing piece of fake news that exploded out of BuzzFeed, was carried by the corporate media, and now they're all trying to backtrack. They're pointing fingers at each other. It was your fault. You should have checked this. Julian Assange has just chimed on in saying that the publication of this dossier allowed others to do what BuzzFeed should have done and expose the poor sourcing of last week's CIA report. where they're just grabbing at anything that they can find and putting it together into an updated version of the dodgy dossier. That's really what it all came down to. And story over at Government Slaves, will the CIA now retaliate against Trump for making them look bad? It's entirely possible. Alrighty, we're going to go back to the news here. Very alarming situation. Over at shtfplan.com, they have a report, distinct possibility Obama will initiate measures to place us into a war with Russia. And everybody's been talking about it. They don't know how it's going to be brought about. I have a theory I'm going to share with you. But before that, there are more indications of a massing of NATO and U.S. forces all along the border with Russia, preparing for an invasion. Story out of Zero Hedge. Thousands of U.S. troops arrive in Europe in one of the largest deployments since the Cold War. And basically talking about 2,800 tanks, trucks, military equipment to Germany, where they can be transported by rail and road to Eastern Europe as part of the buildup of NATO reinforcements against Russian aggression. We all know who the aggressor is, and it's not Russia. Look at the last 15 years of U.S. history, you know who the aggressor is. Another story coming out of Sputnik News. U.S. troops deployment turning Europe into a tinderbox ready to ignite. And they're absolutely correct about that. Story out of Press TV. U.S. troops begin arriving in southeast Poland. Now, how is Obama going to start the war? Putin's certainly not going to do anything. They've missed all the golden opportunities for false flag attacks. But there is one very real possibility, and we need to talk about it. We need to share it with everybody that we know. This is a call to the Rivero's Rangers to grab this story and flood social media with it. Back in 2014, it came on out that Ukraine bought a bunch of Russian T-72 tanks. Now, the reason it raised eyebrows is because Ukraine does not use the T-72, and these T-72s were basically junk. They were bought from Hungary for basically the value of the scrap metal. Most of them cannot even move under their own power. Well, why would Ukraine do something like that? Well, because Russia does use the T-72. And so the only possible purpose for these tanks to be acquired by Ukraine is to paint them in current Russian colors and then fake a Russian attack. Russia sent tanks across the border, we fought them off, and here are the photos of the burning Russian T-72 tanks. Basically a replay of the Gleiwitz incident. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, the Gleiwitz incident is how Adolf Hitler launched his war into Poland. He sent a bunch of his operatives dressed in Polish clothing. They even took along a captured Polish prisoner and shot him dead so his body would be found there. And they attacked the radio station at Gleiwitz, Germany, which was the biggest radio station in that part of the country. And they were broadcasting all over, we're under attack, the Polish are attacking us. 24 hours later, Hitler gets on the radio and says, Poland has attacked us, we must fight back or face destruction. That's how wars get started. And it looks to me that with those tanks, they have the parts they need for a new fake-out. And that's why it's important that you take this story, it's right on the main page of WhatReallyHappened.com, and you flood it all over social media. Because there's absolutely no reason for anybody to buy non-functioning junk T-72 tanks other than to plant them as phony evidence for a phony invasion. And right now it looks to me like a repeat of Gleiwitz, faking a Russian invasion using these junker tanks is the most likely scenario we're looking at. And by the way, little footnote, another reason why this purchase of these Hungarian T-72 tanks drew attention was because they were shipped to Ukraine by a very circuitous route around Europe. Somebody didn't want the world to know Ukraine was buying these old, busted-up T-72 tanks. And maybe they were planning a false flag back then, and they called it off. But they have those tanks, and they would be absolutely perfect for faking a thwarted Russian invasion. and sending all of those massed weapons and forces across the border into Russia, aiming for Moscow as hard and fast as they can go. So please make a point. If you do nothing else today with anything that's at WhatReallyHappened.com or this radio show, grab that story and post it to all your social media. With that concern that these junk T-72 tanks can be used to stage a phony invasion by Russia into Europe. Because that looks like a very, very strong possibility right now. And again, I would think that starting a war is a very iffy proposition given the current quality of American weapons systems. Now, apparently, as you know, there's been talk about the United States shooting down North Korea's next test launch, which is a pretty icky thing to do. But North Korea is going to test a missile, we're going to shoot it down. That's actually a high-risk proposition, not for the reasons of starting a war. But apparently the Pentagon's weapons testing office is saying that the United States' $36 billion, with a B, system of ground-based interceptors can't be counted on to reliably hit missiles aimed at the West by North Korea or Iran. It just doesn't work as advertised. And we go back over the F-35 problems, the F-22 problems, littoral-class combat ships and everything. And now we're hearing that there's another problem that has surfaced with the latest aircraft carrier, the Gerald R. Ford. Now, one of the reasons it costs so much and has been so delayed is they abandoned the traditional steam-powered catapults of existing carriers in favor of a magnetic railgun system. And apparently there's been a problem because whereas the steam catapults had a ramp-up in terms of maximum force, the railgun just launches immediately at full bore, and they've discovered it's overstressing the frames of the aircraft. And basically the stress problem, according to the Navy, would preclude the Navy from conducting normal operations of the FA-18 and the EA-18G. They physically cannot stand the stress of that sudden punch. So, now do you remember the last Olympics and there was this big hue and cry where they had a Russian defector who said Russia was doping their athletes, and they kicked out a bunch of the Russian athletes, kicked out all the Special Olympics contenders as well. I mean, huge slap in the face. And then months later it came on out that the actual analysis of blood samples drawn from the athletes showed there was nothing there at all. But if at first you don't succeed, lie again, and the national anti-doping organizations are calling for a permanent ban of all Russian athletes from all international sports competition, as well as to strip Russia of the right of hosting any global tournaments. It's just another dig. It's another go. Come on, Putin. We're going to keep on doing this until you strike back. I dare you to step across that line. I dare you to knock this stick off my shoulder. It is very childish, and we could laugh at it if there weren't mushroom clouds on the far side of all this nonsense. Now, over in France, bad news for George Soros and his globalists. Marine Le Pen is surging into the lead in the latest French presidential election polls. People in Europe have had it with this globalization, European Union. They're certainly absolutely terrified out of their minds that the U.S. is going to actually start a real war with Russia that could easily wind up in their front yards. They've already been through that twice. They don't need to see it again. Now, amid all the screaming and crying about Russia influencing American politics, there's another story that has basically been ignored by the corporate media. And that was where there was a senior diplomat in the Israeli embassy in London who was caught on video plotting to basically remove members of the British government, including Foreign Office Minister Sir Alan Duncan, because they weren't pro-Israel enough. We know here in this country, Israel's always tinkering with our politics through AIPAC, through various other groups, through all these Israel firster politicians on Capitol Hill. And let's see, the Israeli embassy had been plotting to undermine labor leader Jeremy Corbyn, and they were caught on video allocating funds toward that goal. Israel's the one who's tinkering in foreign governments and foreign elections, but according to the U.S. corporate media, it's okay for them to do that. We expect Israel to come on over here and reduce Washington, D.C. to a Vichy government. It's okay for Israel to do it, but if Russia's even suspected of doing it, that's cause for war. Now, over in Israel, where their idea of peace with Palestine is to have more pieces of Palestine, Israel's Justice Minister, Aiea Shaked, is basically invoking biblical mythology, saying that the Bible gives Israel a legal right to a Palestinian city. Because in the Old Testament or the Torah, there is a text about how this place was bought by Abraham, and the first deed of sale of its type in its world, so we have a historical and legal right to the place. No, the Babylonians kind of erased your title deed a little bit more recently. But again, the Bible is not really law, and it's not used as foundation for law, at least anymore in a civilized world. You have to remember the Bible was cited as the source for the legal right to torture and burn all those accused witches. I don't think we want to go back there. We're going to take a phone call here. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, what's going on? Mike, I'm thinking about what they're doing on the border with Russia right now. They may be, it may come to the point where Putin's just going to decide to launch a blitzkrieg.
I don't think he's going to do that. I think he's just counting the time until Trump can get on in, but obviously if the U.S. does stage a Gleiwitz repeat with those Junker T-72s and the forces go across the border into Russia, Putin will have to respond at that point. But I think he'll confine the war to within Russia's territory so that he can rightly say to the world, we're fighting a defensive war. We're not invading anybody. We're not trying to conquer anybody. We are fighting a defensive action against foreign invasion that is completely unprovoked.
But the thing, Mike, is this. Russians have a memory about World War II, and rightfully so. When they see people massing on their border like that, they might just say, to heck with it. His generals might even be advising him, we got to go first. We got to hit them first. Kind of like in 1967, I believe Israel was kind of like surrounded. At least they felt they were surrounded.
They claimed they were surrounded. Hang on. Okay. Israel claimed it was surrounded. Israel claimed they had intelligence that these other countries were about to attack, and there never was any. It was just, again, another big lie to sell a war. Oh, we've got reliable intelligence. Egypt and Syria are about to attack us, so we have to attack them now. It was another complete, absolute pile of government bovine excrement, and let's be clear about that. There was no evidence Israel was about to be attacked. Israel just hauled off and attacked people, claiming, oh, we're the victim, they were coming after us if we didn't strike first. And I understand that you're probably right. Some of Russia's top military are probably saying that maybe we ought to be a little more proactive, but Putin is still in charge. And Putin understands he's only got to wait this out for the next 10 days. And I'm sure what he's calculating is how far, let's say hypothetically that they stage this phony tank thing tonight and the war is launched tomorrow. Putin's going to be looking at a map and saying, how far can these NATO forces actually get in just 7 days? Because if they can't get to Moscow, then Trump gets into office and everything gets called off. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm right there. I'm saying you're still talking about thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of casualties, and that's provided no nukes get involved. I don't know if he wants to take that kind of a chance. I mean, this is very dangerous what they're doing. I mean, they're these fools running around.
Okay, well, Mark, if Russia actually does something militarily, then the U.S. gets its excuse to declare all-out World War III. And Putin doesn't want that. Trump doesn't want that. It's only the U.S. government and the money junkies and the military-industrial complex who wants that. And, Putin's a chess player. He's going to sit very, very calmly, and he's going to be weighing all these decisions. And I'll tell you that he is not going to strike first, which is why I think the U.S. is going to try and create the illusion that Russia is striking first with those old, used-up T-72s that Ukraine bought from Hungary.
The thing is, Ukraine is still not part of NATO, so there's no reason, even if that was to happen, there's no treaty with the Ukraine. And what I believe Putin's mistake was he was too restrained when it came to when the Ukrainian government was overthrown. He probably should have taken the entire East, maybe the entire Ukraine at that time, which he could have done. He could still
and that would have opened up the door to war with the U.S., which is what Putin does not want to have happen. Putin has always demonstrated tremendous restraint and caution. He does not make decisions recklessly, which has become the hallmark of the United States government, unfortunately. And so, I think the most likely scenario that we're seeing in the next week is they're going to try and claim that Russia has invaded Europe using repainted those T-72 tanks Ukraine got from Hungary. And they'll be off and rushing before anybody can say, oh, there's really no NATO treaty or anything. Anyway, Mark, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Jeff in Dallas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Bonsoir, Mike. How are you today?
Bonsoir.
Hey, man, a quick, three things. About the pronunciation of Melania or Melania.
Yes. I've heard it's Melania.
Melania.
I've heard it's as Melania.
Okay, your beautiful wife, do you call her Clary or Claire?
Claire.
Okay, Donald Trump calls Melania Melania.
Well, I'm going to have to yield to his authority on the subject, and I'll call her Melania Trump from now on. Not that she's talking to me, by the way. Okay, clear that up.
Well, she is beautiful.
She's the hottest first lady in U.S. history.
Jackie Kennedy, reincarnated. But do you know why the fashion designers that design clothes for Michelle Obama refuse to design clothes for Melania Trump?
Well, I guess they're trying to show their loyalty to liberalism and so forth, but frankly, what they created for Michelle Obama was not very impressive. And anybody who's in the design world already knows that if the First Lady is wearing your designs, it is going to be very, very good for business. It's just like over in Great Britain when you win the title, by special appointment to the King or Queen to make boots or whatever, it's going to be great for business. That actually all got started by the Wedgwood China people, who are famous for that blue flat service wear with the white ersatz Greco-Roman designs. And it really is beautiful stuff. But what really took it off was some of it was acquired by the royal family, and Wedgwoods started saying by appointment to their majesties, and everybody said, oh, well, if the king and queen have got this in their house, I've got to have it. And it became a global brand. And so, any designer who's out there saying, I refuse to design for the First Lady, is cutting their own throat business-wise, or maybe they just understand they're not going to be able to compete with the other designers anyway, and they don't want to go through the humiliation of submitting designs and being rejected.
I may differ with that. I think the designers that design clothes for Michelle Obama refuse to design clothes for Melania Trump because they don't know how to design dresses for women.
Oh, come on. Some of the stuff I saw. All right, well, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. And, in fairness, yes, it's going to be a lot easier to design for Melania. But frankly, I don't know why these other designers got to design for Michelle, because what they designed didn't work. There were things that would have worked a lot better on her frame, and I don't know what, political patronage. It's like the other day I was saying that foundation grants are handed out as payback for political favors. Maybe the same thing applies to design firms as well. We donated to the campaign. We get to design for the First Lady. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are still open, 800-313-9443. Let's talk about the economic news because, frankly, there are some areas of concern. And, again, Barack Obama is out there trying to create his legacy about how the economy recovered under his watch, and that absolutely is not true. According to Pew Research, the middle class shrank during Obama's 8 years in office. And there are two factors at work there. First of all, the middle class is where the disposable income is. So as people start grabbing, and you must buy this and you must buy that, and we're going to raise your insurance rates, that tends to preferentially burden the middle class. The second one is, if you look throughout history, all tyrannical governments try and destroy the middle class because it is from the middle class that opposition to oligarchy arises. They tried to do it in revolutionary France. They certainly did it in the Soviet Union by designing a system where there was no middle class allowed. And we're seeing the middle class under attack here in the United States because it is from the middle class that opposition to the current regime, the establishment, has been rising. So it may be intentional. Now, the reality is, despite Obama's claims that he was presiding over this wonderful economic recovery, right now 69% of all Americans have $1,000 or less in bank savings accounts. And frankly, with negative interest rates on the horizon, even that's too much. But it basically says Americans don't have any economic resiliency. They are one disaster away from being homeless. We're all standing on thin ice right now. Now, yesterday we reported how Citigroup had cut their recommendation for Goldman Sachs to sell. It turns out there's a little tit-for-tat going on there because apparently Goldman had cut Citi to neutral. Now, the bank stocks are still skyrocketing because everybody understands that the Federal Reserve is still creating money out of thin air and pouring them all over the banks. So they just want to get in on that action. But it looks like we're starting to see the Wall Street firms actually go on the attack against each other. A little bit of a war using the ratings as the weapon. Oh, they're less secure than we are. You want to bring your money here. So if they're now starting to fight amongst themselves over the available remaining wealth out there, that's a sign that we're getting really close to a break. Out in Los Angeles, the city is being forced to borrow $70 million solely to pay out liability payments for wrongful arrests, people injured, or families of those killed by the police. And this is going to cost the city about $9 million per year just in the interest charges. And basically, the city has used up their reserve fund for all these high legal payments to victims of police shootings, wrongful convictions, and so forth. Well, maybe instead of going deeper into debt, you might want to rein in the wrongful shootings, the wrongful convictions. You might want to get the police under control if you want to save some money, rather than simply burden the taxpayers that much more. Now, the World Bank Group is out there analyzing Donald Trump's proposed tax cuts, saying it will boost economic growth. And that's not too surprising. We saw the same thing with the Reagan tax cut. Remember the big, famous Reagan tax cut? He slashed taxes, and all of a sudden the economy lit up, became much more productive, more products are going out, more wealth was being generated, and government tax revenues actually increased because of the boost to economic activity. And why the liberals don't seem to recognize that lesson, that taxing the people more and more and more harms the economy, shuts it down. And we're hovering at the edge of a lockup as it is. What you have basically is this upside-down U-curve between economic activity and tax rates. And you want to be kind of in that middle area. But the more you tax, the more you're dragging down to that part where the government is simply taking everything that's being produced, taxation, fees, civil forfeiture, ransomware, and there isn't enough money left in circulation to run the economy. We're already there. We're already there. There isn't enough currency in circulation to have the economy functioning smoothly. Everybody's waiting for somebody else's check to clear. And all we ever hear from the bankers are, well, look, we're willing to give you a credit line. We're willing to loan you more money, increase the degree of slavery. That's not what people want. People don't want more loans. People want a system in which they're able to trade their labor for decent wages and salaries, which they will then pump back into the economy at the shopping malls, car dealerships, and so forth. That's what makes sense. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. We're talking about the economy. We're talking about Trump's proposed tax cuts and how they might actually stimulate the economy a lot better than all of this stealing money from the American people and pouring it all over Wall Street, which hasn't done anything but stimulate Wall Street. And they're already overstimulated. I think a good analogy of an economy would be a pickup truck going up a hill, and it's got some rocks in the load bed. Now, the rocks represent taxation, and the strength of the engine represents the functioning economy at its best. But part of that energy from the engine is used up by the engine itself, by the transmission, by the brakes, and so forth and so on. So there's an upper limit to how much of a load you can put on that truck. One rock too many, and the engine will start to stutter and stall. And that's a real good analogy for what we're seeing right now. That the money junkies are taking so much wealth out of our system that the economic engine is beginning to stutter. Now, resource investment expert Rick Rule is addressing something that is lurking behind all of these economic discussions. Right now, the U.S. has $120 trillion of debt, plus off-sheet liabilities. And that's not counting state and local debt and underfunded pensions. It's huge. And Rick Rule is saying that the only thing that's going to happen, that can possibly happen right now, is the U.S. will devalue the debt and devalue the dollar. And what they mean by that, the short version is the U.S. government is simply going to inflate the debt away. We owe you $100 trillion? Okay, crank, 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 crank. Here's $100 trillion in ink and paper. And of course, that will result in a loss to you of real purchase power with the ink and paper you already have. Creating new money out of thin air is just another way of stealing from you, the American people. And many countries have gone down that road before of simply inflating the debt away, Zimbabwe being one of the more recent offenders. And like so much else in government policy, it's good in the short term. It works until the next election. But in the long term, it is not a solution. It's just kicking that can down the road yet again. And at this point with the U.S. economy, they've kicked that can down the road so much, it's beginning to look like a used-up gun wrapper. Just a little bit of silver foil is left. That's all there is. Now, down in Mexico, the protests over the increase in gas prices are getting out of control. Still not being acknowledged by the American corporate media. Don't want us American slaves getting uppity ideas. But apparently there are now areas in Mexico where the government has actually been ejected, and people are talking about Mexico being on the brink of an outright revolution. It's been so out of control that the border crossing at San Diego has had to be closed several times this last week. And it could happen here. We've seen it in South America. Now it's moving north. Now, a lot of people were disappointed with Donald Trump because he campaigned on the repeal of Obamacare And then after he was elected, he started sounding more in a compromising mood, and he began to look at various alternatives, things that they could do to fix it, make it a little bit better. And everybody said, well, see, he's already breaking that campaign promise. Well, apparently nothing that was presented to Donald Trump seemed to pass his business acumen, because now he's back to saying a full and immediate repeal of catastrophic Obamacare, and it was. Now, obviously, provision is going to have to be made for all those people who were forced to give up their current health insurance policies to go on Obamacare, and with Obamacare gone, their health insurance companies may not want some of them back who are dealing with chronic illnesses or serious illnesses. Obviously, if you're perfectly healthy, your health insurance company will welcome you back. So we have to make sure that we don't abandon people who've already been victimized once by Obamacare and victimize them a second time with the repeal of Obamacare. Other than that, I'm wholly on board of repealing Obamacare and letting us go back to either a system in which health insurance companies have to compete for our business, which is better for the consumers, or a well-managed single-payer system, like maybe they have in Canada or France. But even those can have problems. We were reporting yesterday about this big stink over in Great Britain, where apparently during the year 2015, 800 patients died partially as a consequence of hunger and dehydration. They were in these NHS health hospitals, and they weren't being adequately fed, and they weren't being given adequate fluids. I think maybe going back to the neighborhood doctor and getting rid of all of this gigantic overhead, because that's where a lot of this cost comes from, is all of this gigantic overhead. Doctors today spend more time filling out paperwork than they do seeing patients. Certainly wasn't the case when I was a kid. It needs to be drastically simplified. But again, medical care in this country has been transformed from being about medical care and health to plundering people who are chronically ill, often made so by some of the other aspects of our civilization. Toxic food additives, vaccines, the occasional dropped test tube over at the bioweapons lab, and so forth. Now, there's another article on this very same topic over at patriotrising.com basically saying that Obamacare is very much like the war in Vietnam. It simply cannot be won no matter what you do, and the choice is end it now and deal with it, or try and drag it out even longer where the costs of ending it will be that much more. Now, over in Europe, where George Soros is trying to assemble the first stepping stone to his new world order of everybody blended together, apparently over in Great Britain, actually, there was a nurse who was apparently on her way home, and she heard what she thought was somebody crying for help in a park. And she walks in to render assistance. She's grabbed by 5 men who are described as being of African appearance, who beat her unconscious and then raped her. So how's that cultural diversity thing working out for you over there in Europe? Apparently not too well. There's been a survey done in Great Britain about the British identity. How do British people see themselves? And to nobody's surprise, they're finding that more and more Brits are seeing themselves in terms of their patriotism to England. Less and less of them see themselves as part of this grand European Union. And the numbers are surging more towards a nationalist fervor. We're seeing nationalism emerge all over the world in response to all this globalist nonsense. We're seeing it here in the United States. We're seeing it all over the European Union. People are dealing with all of the economic hardships of these global or transnational private central banks. And they're saying, we cannot be responsible for what's happening in other countries. Although in the case of the United States, clearly our government is responsible for the wars in all those Middle Eastern nations that made those people refugees. But that's kind of a separate issue. Donald Trump is right. Make America great. We need all of us, all of the American people, to put America first, second, and third. And anybody who doesn't want to go along with that, anybody who feels that we should be subservient to that foreign government over in Tel Aviv, is free to leave this country anytime they want. Because we can't afford them anymore. We can't afford all of this vast sums of money pouring out of our pockets into a foreign nation that doesn't really need the money and tends to spend it, first of all, bribing our own government to keep the flow of money going, and to purchase weapons with to inflict mayhem on their neighbors. Now, a little bit of good news coming out of Europe. Hungary has now started a crackdown on all George Soros-funded organizations. And basically, apparently, they were waiting for Trump to go into the White House, because apparently Obama was intervening with Hungary, saying, no, don't you do anything about Soros. And, you know, we're all behind Soros and his plan to create a one-world government and a single golden throne for planet Earth, because I want my turn sitting on it. And now with that interference and restriction gone, Hungary, and this is a dramatic blowback against the globalist establishment, they're going to crack down on these George Soros organizations. Russia's already kicked them out because the world has come to understand these George Soros organizations are not about charity. They're not about making life better. They're about bringing individual sovereign nation states into this single global empire. And this single global empire is not being done for your benefit. It's being done for those who will rule it. A single global private central bank, a single global government. You know, I find it very amazing that you read history books about Alexander the Great. What an amazing man. He conquered all this part of the world. And then you dig a little deeper and you find out what life was like for the ordinary people in all of these places Alexander conquered. Or for that matter, in the Roman Empire. And you find out it wasn't really very good, wasn't very pleasant. And if there's one way that history has cheated us all, it is the portrayal of tyrannical empires as somehow being a good thing for everybody involved. And it most assuredly was not. Now, Obama, in his farewell address, called on white Americans to acknowledge the effects of slavery and Jim Crow because it didn't suddenly vanish in the 1960s. And remember, the racism in the 1960s was an artificial construction of the FBI's COINTELPRO program, just like it was for Hillary's campaign this last year. And nowhere in this whole speech about how we have to accept the effects of slavery and feel appropriately sorry was there even a mention of that mentally disabled white guy tortured by the 4 blacks up in Chicago. The agenda clearly is blacks can do no wrong, all white people are evil. No, we're not. We're not. And the most important thing that we can all do right now is to resist this idea that we all somehow share a collective inherited guilt for things that happened before we were born. That's one of the most powerful psychological enslavement tools governments use. Israel uses it all over the time. I wasn't born during World War II. The vast majority of you listening to this show were not born in World War II, and still Israel says, you have to pay us because of what we tell you happened in World War II. No, we don't. We're not responsible. We had nothing to do with it. Our responsibility is to deal with the evils that are happening today in front of us, evils that we can do something about, evils that we can bring to an end. That's where our focus should be. All this stuff about reparations for things that happened centuries ago, it's nonsense. It's just another excuse for somebody to hold their hand out and say, gimme, 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 gimme. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to take a phone call. Tony in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I was calling. I was listening to your talk with Richie Allen the other day, and I would have to agree with you. I'd say on 95%. I like Richie Allen. I just think, his expectations are a little bit unrealistic. You know what I mean? Like, I understand where he's coming from, but, Trump is only one man. There's still Congress. There's a lot of things he has to go through. And, people talk about Trump's appointments, but all those appointments need to get approved by Congress. So, some of the appointments he would have liked to have gotten approved would never have gotten approved. They were talking about Dana Rohrabacher from California. He would have been a great Secretary of State.
Yes.
But there's no way in hell he would have ever have gotten appointed. So that's another thing. That's one of the things. The other thing, too, is, domestic policy. I know Richie looks at foreign policy. I think, good relations with Russia and Syria are positive. Obviously, Israel, I don't think it's realistic to have much change there. Domestic policy such as trade and immigration are issues, too, that were relevant to the American people. I think that was another issue you didn't, really bring up. So, on the issue of Israel, there's not much that you can really say about that. I know here in Toronto that 75% of the Trump hotels are owned by an Israeli-Russian businessman, and Trump said before that he has, business dealings with the Israelis. So there's not going to be much on that. But, if he can make even some changes on the other issues, I think we just got to take that as a positive step. We're not going to get 100% of what we want. But like I said, we have to be realistic. And I doubt I know he's appointed a lot of Iran war hawks, but I really doubt there's going to be a war in Iran. I know he's talked about scrapping the deal, but I think Trump is smart enough not to start another conflict. And if he really wants good relations with Russia, I doubt starting a war with Iran is going to do that. And if he, by any chance, did start a war with Iran, that would completely destroy his legacy. So I think he's smart enough not to do that. I don't know if you agree with that.
Well, I want to go back to the first thing you said, because you raised a very excellent point, because a lot of us had people that we wanted to see in the Trump administration, Trey Gowdy as Attorney General. But you brought up a very valid point. When Donald Trump is looking at people he's going to appoint to his cabinet, he had to take into consideration whether or not Congress was likely to confirm. And that had to be a major factor in terms of putting together his cabinet. And that's probably something that a lot of people haven't talked about before, is that Trump may well have wanted Trey Gowdy for Attorney General, and in communications with the leadership, they came back and said, absolutely no way would we confirm. So that may be a big reason why Trump's appointees do seem to be so many insiders, because those are the ones he knew he could get confirmed, and that's a very good point you raised.
No, absolutely. I don't know why people haven't brought that up, and I know McCain and Lindsey Graham have already been on top of a few of the appointments, already pretty much saying, yeah, we're not going to appoint this guy and that guy. And I think I believe the Secretary of Defense was somebody that he didn't get the guy he wanted in either, because he was already told by Congress that there was no way he was going to approve that. So, yeah, it's a fair point as well. And I guess just one last point. I know you guys brought up InfoWars in regards to Israel, and obviously the rhetoric, with Israel lately, which has been, disturbing. We know that, Alex has always supported Israel, but I think now it seems that InfoWars is really connected to the Trump campaign and the Republican Party. I think they've created a closer connection. That could be a reason why maybe he's, talking positively about Netanyahu. That could be a reason. I don't know, but unfortunately, that's another thing that won't change. But that's it. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And again, you're right. People should have been raising the issue of Trump's desire for cabinet positions and officials constrained by his awareness of whether or not Congress would confirm. And that had to be a major factor as well. As far as Trump's closeness with Alex Jones, Alex is a major figure within the independent media. Trump understands the independent media was very much on his side. And so it is inevitable that Alex Jones' personal biases regarding Israel are probably going to cross that bridge to Trump as well. But as I told Richie Allen, and I've mentioned on this show, I think a lot of Donald Trump's views about Israel and Palestine are shaped by what he sees in the corporate media. And even though he now knows the corporate media is duplicitous, he hasn't gone through the exercise of looking back over the years and saying, what else were they lying to me about? But I think once he actually interacts with Israel's government, I think his enthusiasm is going to decidedly cool. We got to give him his 100 days. Let's find out. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Obama, in his farewell address, mostly talked about himself, what a great guy he is. And he made a comment about white people having to accept the effects of slavery and Jim Crow laws. stuff that happened before we were born. And he brought back the racial tension of the 60s, which we know was intentionally fanned up by the government using COINTELPRO to keep us divided and at each other so we could not unite in opposition to the war in Vietnam. And they fanned it up again last year, thinking that if they could convince the black people that the whites were out to get them and evil, that the black people would all vote for Hillary Clinton. Didn't work out. Even the leaders of Black Lives Matter came on out and said, Hillary Clinton is saying exactly the things we want to hear, and we have absolutely no reason to think she will ever keep any of those promises. And that was a big part of why she lost. She's not seen as trustworthy. It's got nothing to do with Russia hacking. What do you think? Russia snuck into Hillary's room at night and hypnotized her and said, you will not be trustworthy, you will not be trustworthy, you will not be trustworthy. But again, Obama failed to mention that very ugly incident in Chicago where this group of black people live-streamed the torture of a mentally disabled white person. And the liberal media was quick to cover it up and say it's no big deal. Even the Chicago police were saying, this sort of stuff happens all the time. It's no big deal. And the outrage caused by the video resulted in finally the court saying, yeah, you're right, it's a hate crime. And the judge is not releasing the perpetrators on bail. And CBS radio news actually phrased the story in a way to imply the victim was black and the perpetrators were white. Didn't come on out and actually say that, but it was definitely, in the way it was worded, that's what people would have concluded, trying to figure out what was being said. Very, very dishonest here. Still trying to sell that idea that all racism comes just from white people, all the violence is coming from the white people, and it's simply not true. Even the FBI's crime statistics don't back that up. Well, apparently another video has surfaced showing one of these black attackers, Tasfea Cooper, and he's basically pointing the gun directly at the camera and saying things like, boom, put a bullet in your white skull. Now again, I think this is an after effect of that entire year of Black Lives Matter and race baiting and just trying to create a serious racial division in this country to benefit the Hillary Clinton campaign or to keep us angry with each other and not paying attention to the government. And both of those agendas have failed. But now we're living with the after effect of this policy. And it reminds me of that story about how when Donald Trump got elected, all of a sudden teachers all across the country were dealing with absolutely traumatized pupils in their classrooms because for the entire year they'd been propagandizing the kids about all the horrible things that were going to happen if Trump became president, what a monster he was evil, he was this and he was that, in the hope that the kids would go home from school and say, at school they taught me this about Donald Trump and you've got to vote for Hillary. And that also did not work either. And so the election comes and goes, Trump wins, and all of a sudden these kids who don't understand their teachers were feeding them a big heaping pile of USDA choice bovine excrement, they're now in a panic because they believed all these things that they were told about Donald Trump. And now we have the same thing happening here, where we've had an entire year of black people being told you're oppressed, you're being discriminated against, the white people hate you, violence is your only response, Baltimore, Trayvon Martin, all this other stuff. And now we have these kids who are out there who absolutely believe everything they've been told about white people. And that's how we get these videos. That's how we get these kind of crimes. If we ever needed another Dr. Martin Luther King to heal this racial divide, we sure as heck need one right now. Unfortunately, all of the, you'll pardon the expression, leaders of the black community are compromised. Now, getting on down to that shooting at the Fort Lauderdale airport, it continues to be a very, very bizarre story. Apparently, this guy had been interviewed by the FBI. They'd taken his gun away from him because he was claiming the CIA made him fight for ISIS. And apparently, he did at one point. Let me scroll on down here. where the airport shooter did convert to Islam and took the name Ashik Hamad years before joining the Army. And then for some reason the FBI gave him back his gun. And he hopped on the plane and he went down to Fort Lauderdale and he just started shooting. We're now hearing from the shooter's former girlfriend that the VA knew he was suffering from mental illness. He'd gone to the VA saying, there's something going wrong in my brain. Maybe they tried some experimental drugs on him when he was over there in Iraq, because the Army likes to do that. Use the soldiers as guinea pigs. And the VA did nothing. The VA went out and spent money on artwork for their front lawn. So if you really want to have somebody to blame for the shooting outside the shooter himself, who is obviously to blame, the VA, because they're neglecting these patients. And it's one thing to neglect somebody who's lost an arm or a leg and they're basically static in their home. And quite another and more dangerous thing to be ignoring all of these veterans who return from the war zone with their brains seriously messed up from all the drugs that were given to them. We had a caller into the show who'd served in Iraq saying that the Army was passing out prescription antidepressants like they were M&Ms. The Pentagon is actually spending more on medication for the troops than they are on Black Hawk helicopters. And these things are very addictive. And if you go to ssristories.org, you will find all these reports about how ordinary, perfectly healthy, rational people can all of a sudden just flip on out on these medications and do the most bizarre things. A great part of our current problems may be because the United States has become a nation that is drugging itself into insanity and aberrant behavior. We did our own little analysis here and showed that coincident with the market penetration of prescription antidepressants into our society, which is about 1 out of every 4 people now, there was a marked increase in incidence of domestic violence because these medications interfere with impulse control. You can just get an impulse in your head and you will go with it. There's nothing to stop it. That may account for the surge in things like pedophilia. You get a moment of lust for a child and you just go with it, where normally you wouldn't. I know finally people are starting to seriously look at the issue of vaccines and autism, and I'm just delighted that Donald Trump appointed Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to head that commission. But I think we also need to take a really serious look at prescription antidepressants. I mean, there's no question they're being over-prescribed. 1/4 of the American people can't be clinically depressed. It's just a big money maker. And as long as profit dominates the process of medical care, we're going to get high prices and poor medical care. And that's where we are. American medical care is the most expensive on earth, and it's ranked something like 33rd in quality for all that money. Now then, over in California, they passed a law saying that it would be up to the prosecutors who work for the government to decide whether a police officer who kills someone should be charged with a crime. Now, up until that point, the law had been, and it is still the law in the other 49 states, that a secret grand jury looks at the evidence and decides if the police officer ought to be prosecuted. And California decided, well, we're paying way too many lawsuits for wrongful shootings and everything, so we're going to take the grand jury out of it, and it'll be up to the prosecutor to decide if the police officer will be charged. And if the prosecutor says, no charges, that's the end of it, the police officer goes back to work, no lawsuits, no settlements, no fines, and so forth. That's their solution. Well, apparently the state appeals court has declared that law unconstitutional, basically saying it actually violates due process, saying that these decisions have to be made by a grand jury. Now, up in New Hampshire, live free or die, they're starting to talk about permitless carry of firearms. Now, this is nothing new. Vermont has always had permitless carry of firearms, which is one of the reasons they have one of the lowest per capita murder rates of any state in the nation, as opposed to places like Chicago, which is held up as the example of gun control success by the gun grabbers. And they've got huge numbers of murders, and now we're hearing that even those numbers may be underreported because it's got a huge embarrassment for Mayor Rahm Emanuel and for the gun grabbers. Because history has always shown when law-abiding citizens are allowed to carry weapons, crime goes down. When the law-abiding are disarmed, crime goes up. There's never been an exception to that. So that's something the corporate media and the gun grabbers need to hide from you. Now, New Hampshire is starting to talk about repealing the need for a permit to carry your own gun. Maine has already done it. I think it's a good idea. If just one of those people at the Fort Lauderdale airport had been carrying a gun, there'd be only one dead person instead of 5. And we're actually starting to see a big pushback where states are now talking about allowing teachers and even students to carry on college campuses and in shopping malls. Get rid of those gun-free zones. We were talking about one state is considering a law where if a business declares itself a gun-free zone, that business would be liable for any harm caused by an armed intruder on those disarmed customers. And I think that's a good thing as well. And, of course, the gun grabbers are going to say, well, if everybody's armed, it's just going to be like the Wild, Wild West. Well, that might not be a bad thing, because the Wild, Wild West was nowhere near as wild as you have been told. Yesterday we were talking about the gunfight at the OK Corral and how Hollywood has always portrayed it from Wyatt Earp's perspective, because Wyatt Earp actually went out to Hollywood and served as a technical advisor for the early silent film cowboy stars like Tom Mix. The reason we remember the OK Corral was it was very unusual. I mean, if it happened today, it would be lost in the newspapers amid all the other drive-by shootings and everything going on. It wouldn't be considered newsworthy. It was newsworthy back then because that sort of thing really did not happen. Do you know the main reason why cowboys wore guns in holsters? Because if your horse threw you and your foot was caught in the stirrup, you would be dragged to death unless you had a gun immediately available to shoot your horse with. That's where the gun holster thing came from, along with, of course, the necessity to every once in a while shoot a rattlesnake. The reality is much of the myth of the Wild West was propaganda. Because when the West began to open up and homesteaders were heading on out there, it began to drain the labor force from the Eastern industrialists' factories. And there wasn't anything they could do to stop it. So they started hiring writers to write these so-called dime novels about what a terrible place the Wild West was, and there were bushwhackers and all this other stuff out there, and if you risked your life and that of your family if you went out there, the marauding Indians. And yes, there were some confrontations and crimes, but nothing on the scale of what you saw going on in New York, especially during the draft riots. Compared to the big eastern cities, the West was quite peaceful, and that had to be hidden. So the Eastern industrialists, in order to scare their workers from leaving their jobs to go out west, mounted this propaganda campaign about how wild the West was and people were being gunned down all the time. But it wasn't really that way. Because the fact everybody was carrying a gun, there actually was very little violence. And by the way, you know that iconic image of the fast draw gunfight on Main Street? It never really happened. Nobody has ever found an historical record where two guys just stood at opposite ends of the streets and waited for each other to twitch and then drew their guns and fired. It's as phony as a lot of the samurai stuff you see coming out of Japanese cinema. Even back then during the 1800s, we were being lied to manipulate us, to make us more useful to the wealthy, to the money junkies. Now, I'm obviously very pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment. 2017 may be the year of the gun, where there's a pushback. I think everybody ought to be familiar with the handling of firearms in order to handle them safely. When you hear of an accident where somebody's accidentally shot themselves or somebody else, it's always somebody who's never been taught how to handle a gun properly, who thinks guns are still toys because, they used to sell them as toys. Where I grew up, you got your first gun on your 12th birthday, and with it, the lecture on gun safety, which was the second religion in our community. And the first time you misused that weapon, you would get a trip to the woodshed, would keep you eating dinner standing up for at least a week. So gun safety was taken very, very seriously. We used to take our guns to school all the time. It was no big deal. Put them in the cloakroom. Because on the way home from school, we were all stopping off at the farm fields to varmint them, chase out the critters that were eating our crops. And that was just part of life. There were no mass shootings. In fact, the entire time I lived in that town in New Hampshire, there was only one incident with a gun which appeared to have been a botched suicide. That was it. Nobody mishandled weapons. But nobody's going to know the proper way to handle weapons unless we stop this fear campaign of an object and start saying, this is what a gun is, this is what it can do, this is how you make sure it's not going to go off in the wrong place. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, coming up on the top of the hour. And I want to continue on with this gun issue, because I think it should be apparent to just about anybody that all of the gun laws and restrictions and registration and all the rest of that aren't really working against crime. Certainly those gun-free zone signs do not deter mass shooters. If anything, it's an open invitation. Come on in, have fun. Nobody's going to fire back at you. It's just another excuse to create a bureaucracy for tracking the American people, for tracking the law-abiding citizens, because, let's be honest, criminals and terrorists don't register their weapons. Gun control is not about controlling guns, it's about controlling you. Have you ever noticed the government's obsession with what they call assault-style weapons? Even though those kind of weapons are rarely used, other than these staged mass shootings used to sell the idea of a ban on assault-style weapons. Most gun crime involves throwaway guns, stolen guns. Very simple revolvers or very, very cheaply made semi-automatic pistols. But the focus is always on those assault weapons. Now they want to have everybody provide ID and register just to buy ammunition. It's obvious what they're doing. Each one of these new regulations is a screaming confession that the U.S. government understands they've pushed the American people to the point of a rebellion. And that's what all this gun control nonsense is about. They don't care about crime. Crime justifies spending more on police. The Second Amendment is about giving teeth to the other 9 amendments in that Bill of Rights. And that's what the government's afraid of. We've been hearing politicians, including George Bush, dismiss the Constitution as a blankety-blank piece of paper. In their minds, they want to transition this nation into something more along the lines of, you do what we tell you, you believe what we tell you, give us your money, give us your children, and otherwise just shut the heck up. And that's not what America is supposed to be. And I find it absurd to hear people like Barack Obama just rail about these military-style weapons. And by the way, they're not really military weapons. They don't have full auto or even 3-fire selectors on them. They're semi-automatic. They just look military-ish because that basic AR-15 concept is very flexible. It actually makes for a weapon where you can change accessories very quickly. You can even change the caliber of the gun. All of which is about shooting for target sports. That's what I use my guns for, putting holes in paper. But they're scared. You can feel it in the wind. They are afraid. We're going to take a break for station identification. Back with our third hour after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We got a bunch of stuff here to talk about. Mike is still waiting for you to call on in and pick up the phone, put you on the air here. Now then, as you know, there was a little bit of a kerfuffle involving Megyn Kelly, formerly of Fox News and now at ABC. And the circumstances are a little bit murky. Apparently some of it had to do with the alleged sexual harassment by Roger Ailes. The other story that I heard was that Megyn Kelly demanded something like a $25 million per year salary to go on being a very convincing liar for Fox News. And Fox News said, no, we can't do that. So Megyn Kelly left Fox, did not renew her contract, was hired by ABC. Ironically enough, she had to accept less money at ABC than she had been getting at Fox. Poor baby. She's going to have to live on just a few $1 million a year. Well, ABC is probably already regretting that decision because apparently ABC's ratings have plunged when Megyn Kelly showed up. The American people are not responding to these paid professional liars anymore, these actors and actresses, because that's really what they are. Those people like Brian Williams and Megyn Kelly and Ann Coulter, well, maybe not quite so much Ann Coulter, they don't go out and do reporting. They don't do journalism. They don't even vet the stories. They wear their makeup and they spray their hair and they sit in the studio lights and they read the teleprompter. And they read it with great sincerity. And that's what they're paid to do. And they get a lot of money. They get a lot of money for that. So ABC may have misstepped there. And again, I want to go back and say that I think it would be a good thing for Donald Trump on taking office to use the existing anti-monopoly laws to break up these giant media corporations, to bring back a diversity of opinion, a diversity of perspective, a diversity of information, everybody cross-checking each other. Because that's what we have now in the independent media. We're always checking on each other. Make sure nobody's getting into trouble, getting something wrong. You look at the whoppers that have come out of the corporate media lately. What am I saying? Lately, all along. Saddam's nukes, Assad's sarin gas. Trump hired prostitutes in Moscow to deface the Obama's bed at the hotel. I mean, they're still dealing with that one. Now McCain is being grilled by the media about did he actually believe this document when he forwarded it along to the intelligence agencies. So they're all scrambling and pointing fingers at each other. I look back on people like Edward R. Murrow as representing the best that media can be, whether it's traditional, corporate, or independent. In my mind, Murrow was definitely a hero. And that's not to say that he wasn't compromised and he wasn't keeping secrets. There was an interesting story that apparently Edward R. Murrow was one of the very few reporters invited to meet with Roosevelt at the White House following the attack on Pearl Harbor. And then years later, he was asked, in light of the revelations that Pearl Harbor had not been a surprise, somebody asked him, what was talked about at the White House. Edward R. Murrow apparently said, that story could pay for my kids' college education, so you're not going to get it for free. A little something there. But I do love his speech about wires and lights in a box because it does apply equally to the age of the Internet. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, with all of this chaos going on in the corporate media, we here in the independent media have to be real journalists. We have to fact check. We have to get confirmation. We have to behave more professionally than the paid professionals over at the corporate media in order to survive and ultimately to prevail. I think 2017 is going to be the year of the rise of independent media. So come along for the trip. It'll be fun. We have callers here. Let's start with Sean in Colorado. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi there. Yeah, I agree with you. 2017, we are in the turning point. And I call it the real media versus the drain stream media because it's going down the drain. So,
I think that's definitely a good name for it, but I stopped using the word mainstream media because they're not the mainstream anymore. The vast majority of people are coming to the Internet and the independent media to find out what's going on. Their numbers are going down, our numbers are going up, and there isn't much of anything that they can do to reverse it because all the corporate media can do is try and come up with another big whopping lie to lure people back, which may have been one of the reasons that they went with this P-Gate story.
Right. Michael, I hope you don't mind if I ask you a question. I sent you an email about a cryptocurrency. Did you have time to look at Cloak Coin at all?
Yeah, actually I did, and I'm probably a little behind the curve in terms of cryptocurrencies. I have everybody saying, "Oh, you got to get with Bitcoin and the rest of it," but you know, I'm still a big believer in coinage and paper notes, and I really do need to come up to speed on that. I haven't satisfied myself that these really represent a good basis for an alternative economy because they are completely disconnected from a commodity base for valuation and are subject to manipulation just because by virtue of the fact that they are virtual. But I really should look at those, and I'll look at Cloak.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, they're volatile as all get out right now, but the manipulation part isn't really there as far as, I mean, we know the total supply. I mean, and there's a rate. It's like an interest rate in a bank account, and they've really made a lot of progress since Bitcoin because miners are no longer necessary, and they're very energy wasteful, and as long as you just own some, it's called proof of stake now instead of proof of work. So it's really evolving. And I live in Colorado, and what I'm really interested in is having them be used for the and I don't even smoke. I don't care. I'm not judging it, but the legal marijuana business here, they are still not allowed to have bank accounts, federally insured bank accounts. So this might be a loophole where they really couldn't do much about it.
It's entirely possible, and certainly worth looking at. I mean, the more oppressive and abusive our traditional economic banking system becomes, the more people are justified looking for alternatives. And in the end, currency is whatever any two people agree to use as a medium of exchange. And we know the Federal Reserve wants us to be dependent on their Federal Reserve notes, but there is, in fact, no law against any group of individuals deciding they want to use something else. And this attack on the Liberty dollar and the Ron Paul dollar, I think, was just a pure expression of George W. Bush's ego. Because nobody bothered with the Liberty dollar until they put Ron Paul's face on it. And that's when it all got really ugly. And it's another reminder. It's so hard for our children to learn how to become adults in a country that's being governed by children.
Yeah. Well, hey, Michael, thanks for taking a look at that. And, where there is freedom, there is the opportunity for prosperity. So I say bring it on. Absolutely.
And again, going back to the model of the collapse of the Soviet Union, there were some months where it was really, really difficult, and people had to rely on each other, their friends, their neighbors in their neighborhood to get through. But certainly life in the Russian republics today is a heck of a lot better than it was under the old Soviet rule. And I think we're going to see the same thing in this country. I was hoping that with Trump's victory, we might see the U.S. government sort of wake up and say, all right, we've gone as far as we can in this direction. Let's turn around and head back. But Sadly, I'm not seeing it. It's still business as usual, politics as usual, in Washington, D.C., in the corporate media. So they're obviously beyond any kind of rehabilitation or repentance.
Right. It's time to burn the weeds, Michael.
Yes. Drain the swamp, or drone the swamp. It's cheaper that way. All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to James in Tokyo. James, Ohio gozaimasu, o genki desu ka? What's on your mind today?
Genki desu. Happy belated New Year to you and that harp playing angel.
Yes.
I want to give my take on the dirtiest transition that I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Yes.
You're reading about the Russian report, how Russia is trying to undermine Americans' confidence in the election, and they were trying to hurt the electability of Hillary. I mean, first of all, Hillary hurt her own electability by being so corrupt.
Yes. I
kind of wonder, like, who the hell is sticking their neck out to try and protect Hillary? Number one,
everybody who got rich off of that 1980s CIA gun and drug running operation, everybody connected with that, including the CIA as an institution itself. That's why they were trying to get Hillary in there and keep her protected. Because if that Clinton Foundation unravels, it's going to hit everybody.
That's one of the things I was thinking. Yeah, the Koch intelligence agency. There's a lot of people that don't want to see change, and I also think, a lot of the politicians too, because you had like George Bush Sr., you had Bill Clinton, you had the other Bush, you have Obama, and every time there's a transition, all the time it goes smoothly because they continue what the last person did. I don't see any difference between Obama and Bush. They just continue. And now is the first time in my lifetime that I see someone totally outside who wants to change everything and actually probably does want to make America great again in his heart. And I don't think they can accept it.
Well, the entrenched oligarchs establishment, they've been very comfortable for the last 30 years. And no, they don't want things to change because the system works for them. They have power, privilege, wealth. Wealth just flows to them automatically. They don't have to do anything for it. Who would want to, if you were the beneficiary of that system, you wouldn't want it to change. If I were the beneficiary of that system, I wouldn't want it to change. Okay, let's be very honest here. But it's destabilizing for the country as a whole. I think a big reason Trump won the election is the public perception of him is he was an outsider. But we also understand he's an outsider going into a government that still consists mostly of the insiders, and they're absolutely adamantly opposed to him. And that's why I keep reminding everybody, Donald Trump by himself cannot accomplish anything because he's facing an obstructionist Congress. He's facing an openly hostile corporate media. And the only way Trump is going to be able to accomplish anything is if we, the American people, stand shoulder to shoulder with our President Donald Trump and glare through the windows of those representatives and senators to remind them they work for us. They're supposed to represent us, not Israel, not the military-industrial complex, not Big Pharma. And if they forget that, next election we will do to them what we just got done doing to Hillary. We will overcome the election fraud and get them kicked out of office. And we need to do that with Trump. Let me finish this one thought. With Trump's election, our job is not over. It is just now beginning.
Thanks for your thoughts on that. And I want to add one last thing. I really like the way that Trump handled that press conference calling CNN fake news. It's really nice to see finally somebody that I feel is like an actual leader who stands up to people.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to watch here, and of course, the corporate media is saying, well, he lacks polish and he lacks sophistication. Who cares? Okay, when you bring a plumber into your home to fix the toilet, you don't care if his underwear is showing above his blue jeans or anything. You want somebody who can do the job. And Trump sold himself as the man who can drain the swamp, and that's what we, the American people, want. And we don't care how he sounds or how he looks, or if he says something that offends some hypersensitive buttercup someplace else. We really don't care. There's a job that needs to be done. Trump is our leader. We're going to have to help him get that job done because, unfortunately, the entire swamp is against him.
Thanks a lot, Mike. You have a good day.
All right, same to you, and we're going to switch over to Nick in Southern California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike.
You're on the air.
Yeah. So I saw a book at Target, Megyn Kelly, I think she wrote it, called Settling for More, and I find that ironic because apparently she had to settle for less when she moved over to NBC.
Yes.
But I also wanted to comment that I was raised almost the same way that you were with gun safety. The irony is I'm in Southern California, and I don't have too many people around me like that. I was the one kid in class. We got the gun when we were 12 years old.
Mm-hmm.
We were allowed to go hunting once we passed the safety course. And such things as muzzle safety are the reasons that people get hurt with guns. It's just ridiculous that that people are so unfamiliar with guns that it's dangerous if they ever touch one nowadays, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing is the most dangerous people to have guns are those gun grabbers because they have no idea what to do with them. And you're absolutely right about muzzle safety. It's just developing that permanent consciousness. Where is this thing pointed? I don't care if it's loaded or not. It's just always that muzzle is pointed someplace away, and to the point where it becomes automatic. Now, interestingly enough, when I lived in Southern California, they were just then starting to get into this gun grab, gun hysteria thing, and there was a very active shooting community, and not just in the realm of post Rodney King riots or anything like that. But there was a very healthy recreationist community, Civil War recreationists, mountain man recreationists. My focus on guns has always been black powder, and there were, you couldn't shoot at any of the indoor gun ranges if you were using real black powder because of all the smoke. But there were gun ranges set up by Chileo up there in the San Bernardino Mountains, San Gabriel Mountains rather, where you could go up and just shoot. And there were always people out there and letting each other try their guns and so forth and so on. And for some reason, all these people over there with modern weapons, they all wanted to just one time, shoot that Hawken rifle and just feel what that felt like.
Oh, well, you might find interesting that I live not far from Riverside, California. I've been to some of the ranges you've spoken about, and I live in an area that is a little bit rural, but not that far, and there's a shooting range that you can hear every day within maybe 2 or 3 miles of my place. And, the shooting group out here is still very, very active. I think that, unfortunately, the media is going to make it into something that it's not. The people out here are aware and active. I can tell you that.
Well, what's interesting, here on Oahu, there's a big business in gun clubs for the Japanese tourists. There's even one right in the heart of Waikiki. And the idea is that it's like a regular shooting range, except that the guns are on safety wires and rigs, so they can't be turned away that far from the target, because they understand they're dealing with people from Japan who've never held a gun in their life, and that's the big attraction. They want to come to the U.S. and actually fire a real gun, and they're doing a brisk business over there. But the best gun range is actually out by Cocoa Head, just on the far side of Hanauma Bay. And it was actually originally set up by the police department for their officers to practice on, but they opened it up to the public, and they have gun shows out there. I got to fire a Barrett 50 at one of those shows out there. They've added handgun range and even an archery range there now, which is good because I like archery as well.
Well, my girlfriend and I are going to head out there in the next couple of months to use the timeshare, so we'd love to do that, and if you guys are out and about, we'd love to say hi. Before I go, I'm going to fire off an email to you. It's a funny video where people are making fun of those Hollywood actor videos where they, want to...
Oh, good. I can't wait. I can't wait. I mean, at this point in my life, I've given up any chance of my ever going back into filmmaking or TV, so I can just haul off and express my true opinions about some of those people. Some of them are great. Some of them are really good people. There's something weird about filmmaking. Everybody there is an absolute saint and an angel, or they're an absolute shark, and there just isn't anything in between. And I don't understand the sociology of that, but I've known a lot of really wonderful people and some real total jerks in the duration of my film career. We got to let you go. Take a break for commercials here. We'll be back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I've been corrected by a reader that there was, in fact, one sort of fast-draw gunfight in the history of the West, and that was between Wild Bill Hickok and Davis Tutt. Over apparently Tutt had commandeered a gold watch of Hickok's that Hickok didn't feel Tutt had a right to, and Tutt rather recklessly wore it in public the next day, leading to a confrontation. And but that one incident appears to have been the inspiration for this whole fast draw at high noon history. So I stand corrected on that one issue. Now, let's see. I think we have a caller waiting on the line. Nick in Southern California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
No, we already took it.
I already took it, so we're out of calls right now. Okay, that's fine. I can deal with that. Now then, let's talk about human-caused global warming. Over in Colorado, we were talking about how all the ski resorts are out there opening and the rest of it. Colorado is actually having to close their ski resorts. Arapahoe Basin has closed all ski services as of today. Monarch Mountain is closing. Crested Butte closing. Actually closed on Monday. The reason? Way too much snow. They are very concerned about the dangers of avalanches, and the conditions are too dangerous. We heard the same thing up in Montana where they're closing the ski resorts because of the wind chill factor being a danger. Let's see, apparently in Park City, Utah, they're getting a very, very heavy, unusually heavy dusting of snow here. And over in Portland, Oregon, they had a little bit of snow a couple of days ago, and everybody said, oh, it's snowing, it's no big deal, it's just a dusting, you're a bunch of, weaklings if you're upset by that snow. Well, it's really settled in hard there as well, calling it real snow. The death toll in Europe due to cold has now reached 65. At a minimum, there may be bodies underneath all the snow and ice that will not be visible until the spring melt here. But it is, as the Old Farmer's Almanac predicted, a very hard winter we are coming up on. And to nobody's surprise, of course, the corporate media is flooding out a bunch of stories saying the fact that there's snow and ice and freezing cold is no reason to question human-caused global warming, because global warming is climate and weather is snow and ice is just weather, and the two are completely different. No, they aren't. Climate is weather averaged over time. If you have a cold climate, you have cold weather. If you have a warming climate, you should have warming weather. You're not getting that. And they're still out there pushing this lemon, partly to try and bolster their failing reputations for having participated in such a grand and obvious hoax, and partly because the U.S. government is still desperate for more of your money. They're trying to come up with a way to convince you to pay a carbon tax. Soros wants you to all agree to allow some global environmental authority to control your standard of living. Oh, you're living too high. You're harming planet Earth. You need to move into one of these micro apartments. Your new home is going to be a shipping container with a window. You get a window. Anything more than that, you're a threat to planet Earth. So let's talk about computers, computerization, the out-of-control cybercrime, malware, ransomware, and especially getting into this issue about all your computerized devices. Now, I like computers. I was a huge computer hobbyist when I was a kid. I built my first computer in high school out of telephone relays. It could actually play tic-tac-toe, as long as you always let it go first, and it would always take that center square. But other than that, it was a brilliant tic-tac-toe machine. But today, it's really gone overboard. People are talking about the Internet of Things, and all of these processors connected to the net represent another vector for cybercriminals to use. Now, apparently, Netflix users are being targeted with an email scam that tricks them into turning over their credit card details. It's a phishing scam. The email appears to be from Netflix and asks you to update your membership details. And you should always, always be careful about any email that says you have to update your details, or even worse, the scare tactic. Your account's been compromised. You need to log on in and change your password and Those are scams as well. Have to be very careful about all of this. The government's not going to take care of you. You got to take care of yourself. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm going to step back here, getting back to this issue about Donald Trump calling CNN the fake news over the bogus report that a member of his campaign had met with a Russian representative, which turned out to be completely false, a case of mistaken identity, to be generous. And they're reeling from this revelation that BuzzFeed put out this story, which originated apparently as fan fiction and was presented as a real story involving some rather questionable behavior by Donald Trump and two prostitutes in a hotel in Moscow, and that's all I'm going to mention about that. But they're now reeling from that. CNN has now gone on the attack, okay, saying that, well, you know, you shouldn't single us out because other corporate media outlets are also making these similar mistakes in the turmoil of modern news coverage. They're making excuses, and they're all pointing fingers at each other. And apparently on YouTube, the video of CNN, of their rebuttal to Donald Trump, the comments are just excoriating. They're being roasted, as well as they should be. Now, in the middle of all this turmoil, Facebook is still trying to establish itself as the new authority over what is real news and what is fake news by launching their so-called journalism project, where they, Facebook, will be allowed to decide what is real and fake news. It's really a little bit out of control. Now then, apparently the prudes are coming on back in North Dakota. They're looking at a new law which, if it passes, will require all computers and smartphones and other digital devices sold in North Dakota to have porno blocking filters built in. Now, you can get past the filters if you're willing to pay North Dakota a fee. It's just another way to grab more money. And isn't that the way governments always work? Take something that's out there for free, ban it or require a license, and charge you money for it. Now, apparently this scandal began with Geek Squad, and now it's spreading, where apparently the FBI is offering rewards to Geek Squad technicians and Best Buy employees if, when handling a customer's device, they find illegal content. Now, they're pushing the child porn, which we all agree that's a terrible thing and ought to be dealt with, but it is getting kind of Stasi out there. They're also looking for things like illegally downloaded MP3s and so forth. Apparently, some Best Buy managers are named confidential human sources by the FBI. So if you're taking your computer or device into Best Buy and Geek Squad to be repaired, and I'm actually having to do that this very afternoon, make sure it's cleaned off ahead of time, because you have no privacy in your devices when you're dealing with these businesses. The only reason I'm going to Geek Squad and Best Buy is because all the other computer repair places around us have already gone out of business. Now, here's where it gets interesting for those of you who got burned by Geek Squad and the Best Buy employees, because there's an article over in the Daily Mail in which James Clapper says it's entirely possible that Russian hackers could plant child porn on American computers. Now, we know that that's actually a very common occurrence for people to plant child porn on other people's computers to get them into trouble. It has happened. Some years ago, there was an individual up in Canada who was hacking into computers and planting child porn to get them in trouble with Canada's government, which has a very stern line on child porn. And he was doing it for business reasons, because he would not only get the individual's computer shut down, but the ISP as well. And he owned an ISP himself, and he'd go to all the customers who were all of a sudden cut off from the net and say, sign up with me. We'll get you plugged in by the end of the day. But what Clapper has just done is handed a get-out-of-jail-free card to anybody that is accused of having child porn by Best Buy and the Geek Squad technicians. There's child porn on your machine. Oh, the Russian hackers did it. Really? I have no idea how that got. Had to be Russian hackers. I mean, it really is ridiculous. Another article coming on out here from Patriot Rising. It's time to get rid of social network surveillance. And sounding the alarm that if you are not already aware of this, you have no privacy anywhere in social media. Now, I use Facebook to basically put out stories and promote them. Claire uses her Facebook to promote her music. And that's basically it. But there are way too many people who post details of their personal life on social media, and then it backfires on them badly. It's a very silly, reckless thing to do. It's like taking your most personal, private secrets and just tacking them to the wall at the shopping mall. Everybody's going to read it. Everybody's going to look at it, and there are going to be individuals who take advantage of it, including the U.S. government. Now, the main issue I have with social media surveillance is, when it comes to the NSA, it is not a reliable source of hard intelligence, because everybody lies on social media, especially if they're trying to get a hot date for the weekend. They always want to make themselves look more important than they really are. Just puff themselves up to create a fantasy world in which they're important and they're doing great things. So, there's another warning coming on out about the latest generation of smartphone cameras that are ultra high resolution. And I don't know how real it is, but basically they're saying that flashing the peace sign in a picture taken by one of these high resolution cameras may provide enough data for somebody who knows you to forge your fingerprint for the phone's fingerprint sensor. And I've been hearing a lot of talk about how people are able to fake the pattern on the iris for companies that are using eye scanners and so forth. I'm not sure how real this is, but this is coming out of the National Institute of Informatics in Japan, saying that if you post the peace sign, there may be enough data there to bypass the fingerprint scanner. Little side story here. About a week ago, I had a little accident, and I seriously gouged my index finger to the point where my iPhone wouldn't recognize it. And fortunately, I had set a second fingerprint for the index finger of the other hand, so I was able to get on in. Then I loaded the gouged fingerprint as a third fingerprint, and everything is working just fine. But the sensor really is sensitive to tiny, tiny imperfections in that image. So that may be a ray of hope for your privacy. But in the end, anything that you're carrying out of the house, the phone, the tablet, the laptop, you shouldn't really have your innermost secrets on it anyway. Claire and I, on our smartphones, we don't have any banking data. We don't have credit card data. We avoid using credit cards online. I'm having a big problem right now with Cafe Press because they've stopped using PayPal, and they want you to go through a banker to buy their products. So I'm looking for another provider for the coffee cups and T-shirts that we sell here. Now, there's another issue that you need to be aware of. There's a big boom right now in home security, especially in CCTVs for security and the digital video recorders that record that information. And they will place it online so that you can check your home over your smartphone. I have a very good friend who lives on this island who's got a second home down on Maui, which was subject to vandalism by locals. So he got one of these systems with all these color cameras all over, and he can check in to that device. So far, so good. The problem is that Xiong Mai, the vendor behind many of these Mirai vulnerable digital video recorders, has acknowledged that the 2017 list of super user passwords for certain of their digital video recorders, which are supposed to exist only to allow CCTV installers to get into customer installations, has been leaked online. And the problem is anybody with those super user passwords can log into your DVR remotely and take a look to see if maybe you're not home and it's okay to come on over and break into your house, or worse, your daughter is skinny dipping in the swimming pool and putting on a show for the hackers. But at this point, the issue of security and privacy, the companies aren't going to deal with it. The government refuses to deal with it. If you need privacy and security, you must take responsibility for it yourself. Period. End of discussion. Now, getting back to the North Dakota Access Pipeline, there's been this ongoing confrontation between the Native Americans, who feel that this pipeline represents a threat and a danger to their water supply, and it does. We've been hearing about all these other leaks all over the place, including another one in North Dakota. And it's led to a confrontation with this pipeline company, which is at the moment openly defiant of government orders to cease and desist. Well, at this point, all the police who are there, the private security that's been put out there to try and keep the peace, has now totaled over $22 million, and North Dakota wants the federal government to cover that cost, because the federal government, up until recently, was promoting this pipeline and forcing it through. And there's a lot of money out there. Now, we have been talking about this issue in pharmaceutical industrial complex, where patented drugs are being acquired by financial interests who then jack up the prices astronomically. And basically they're gouging people. It's all about profit, not about care and health. There have been a couple of nasty stories about that. And apparently 2 former executives of Heritage Pharmaceuticals Incorporated pled guilty to basically price gouging, because they took this antibiotic they make and they increased the price more than 8,000% over 6 months in 2013 and 2014. Now, at this point, apparently the District Court for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, these executives were charged. The state of Pennsylvania and 19 other states are now suing 6 major drug makers, including Heritage, of price fixing, of getting together and saying, we're all going to raise these prices by the same amount so nobody will have a low-cost alternative. It's all about the money. Now, Donald Trump has already sounded a warning that drug companies are getting away with murder with this price slashing, and that one comment by Trump was enough to send pharmaceutical stocks much, much lower in today's trading. I think this is a classic case of something I mentioned, where the greed is good meme is starting to fall apart, because the lust for those pieces of ink and paper or numbers in a computer has destroyed the best qualities of what it used to be an American. And a lot of this is driven by that manufactured debt enslavement of the private central banks, where everybody reaches a point of being so deep in debt they're willing to make moral compromises or ethical compromises just to keep the payments going to those bankers. And it rots the society from within. Now, I have nothing against making money, a fair price for the product that you put on out. We look at people like George Lucas, James Cameron, Steve Jobs, who became rich by making something we were willing to pay for. We should hold them up as role models. But people who game the system on Wall Street, or who collude to price fix pharmaceuticals to maximize profits, placing their patients at risk if they can't afford the medication any longer, that's not what America is supposed to be about. And we need to strike that balance again between wanting to get rich and simply being proud of what we do for its quality. There's a Native American word, koyaanisqatsi, means life out of balance. We're definitely there. We've lost our sense of balance. Everything's about more money, more greed. Greed is good. And we reacted with a little bit of shock when Michael Douglas came out with that in the first Wall Street movie, until we came to realize that Wall Street really believes that. They still worship on the altar of Adam Smith. If I'm personally greedy and money gouging, I'm helping the system as a whole. And it's a lie. It's an absolute lie. Nobel Prize-winning mathematician John Nash proved that in his doctoral dissertation. But nobody wanted to listen because they enjoyed being able to be greedy and not feel bad about it. Yes, I'm being greedy, but I'm helping the system. I'm serving a higher, more noble purpose, having solid gold bathroom fixtures. Apparently, the EPA sent something like, over 1 million pounds of toxic metals into Lake Powell. This was the runoff from that accident from the mine blowout the EPA caused that dumped all of this toxic stuff into the Animas and San Juan rivers. Well, those rivers have dumped into Lake Powell, where those toxic metals are now on the bottom of the lake, but because the water at the surface now looks good, the EPA is patting itself on the back for restoring the clean rivers. They didn't restore anything. They just let it run on off. We had the same thing down in the Gulf of Mexico following that disaster. All of these so-called oil dispersants do nothing of the kind. They simply change the density of the oil to where it is heavier than the water and it sinks out of sight. Out of sight, out of mind. If you can't see the oil, then the problem is solved. No, it isn't. Because all of the seafood coming out of the Gulf that feeds on the bottom, such as crabs, they're all contaminated. Latest warning sign from the health area. We're all familiar with Nutella. It's sort of this chocolate spread. Kids love it. It's advertised all over. But apparently, its smooth texture and long shelf life have to do with the use of palm oil. And the European Food Safety Authority is saying that palm oil is more carcinogenic than any other oil, following a similar claim issued by the World Health Organization. Now, Nutella's profits have taken a hit from this, and they're launching a televised campaign to say that how they use palm oil makes it non-carcinogenic. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. All right, we're coming up here on our last commercial break and our last segment of the show, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to jump back to what we talked about in the first hour, where the corporate media has really stepped in a big old bear trap, and they're thrashing around trying to figure out what they're going to do about it. And it all comes out of this unsubstantiated dossier alleging that the Russian government is blackmailing Donald Trump with dirt on illicit activities, including this story that while he was in Moscow, he hired a couple of prostitutes to, shall I put this delicately, deface the bed that the Obamas had slept in when they were visiting Moscow as well. Completely fictional. In fact, it turned out it was a fan fiction story that got grabbed and just went up the chain, went through John McCain to the intelligence agencies, and leaked it on out, and BuzzFeed ran with it, and because of BuzzFeed, the rest of the media jumped on board this sizzling, sensational story of Donald Trump and two prostitutes. And it's complete nonsense. And it's blown up in their face, and everybody's pointing fingers at each other and scrambling. And, of course, at this morning's news conference by Donald Trump, he refused to even take a question from a CNN reporter. Because he'd outed them on how they had reported falsely that a member of his campaign team had traveled to Europe to meet with a representative of the Russian government. And it didn't happen. So CNN is now raising on a busted flush. You would think they would pull back and say, all right, we made a goof here. And they're already out there saying, well, everybody makes goofs. We're not perfect. We acknowledge that and so forth. But I'm looking at the video on YouTube by Jake Tapper explaining why Donald Trump calling CNN fake news is just absolutely wrong. And he's got nothing to build on with CNN's record. And here's where it gets interesting. I mean, the comments are just ripping CNN apart. This video has 275 likes and 6,061 dislikes. And that is very, very telling. CNN is in serious... In fact, the entire corporate media is on suicide watch right now. Here we go. Now then, interestingly enough, everybody's trying to distance themselves from this embarrassment. And even liberal journalists are now attacking BuzzFeed for going with this story. Actually, they're angry. They've all been made to look silly with this nonsense. And they're turning on each other. And that's going to be a good thing, really. Remember when Conan O'Brien used to show these videos from small market TV stations all across the country, and the newsreaders were always saying the exact same thing word for word? I think those are going to go away. This unanimity of information and cooperation is about to go away. The corporate media is feeding on their own. It's a feeding frenzy. Just like with the sharks. There's one shark in the middle saying, look, up in the sky, it's CNN. Because that's exactly what just happened. The corporate media jumped the shark with this one. Everybody saw it. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow here, Thursday, on Republic Broadcasting. All you Riveros Rangers, please remember you are part of the independent media. Take what you learn here, share it with everyone that you know, especially share around the story of the corporate media's latest embarrassment. And we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.